Today, we are counting down the 10 most valuable and historically important Marvel comics of the year 1990. We're going to look at the top 10 ranked by the Overstreet annual price guide prices. Now, we're going to jump right in. Number 10 of the year is Silver Surfer at number 34. It also ranks as the 71st most valuable Marvel comic of the entire decade of the 1990s. This has become a major key issue for a few things. For some, it's the classic cover art featuring the return of Thanos, and some it's because of the storyline, some because it's a smaller print run. Print run estimated at 156,000, which was, on the lower end of Marvel Comics at this time period. Looking at the CGC census, we can see almost 700 copies have been graded of this book. There's almost 300 9.6s or higher. Heritage has only sold one copy of this book since it's still fairly cheap, affordable book. Comics from Marvel were now $1 cover price in the United States. This is the direct edition with the Spider-Man logo in the bottom corner. Using the Overstreet annual price guide, we can compare all grades and see the movement. You'll see that on this book in the last few years, no movement at all in low grades raw, just a little bump in higher grades. And of course, for CGC super high grade copies, check out the gpanalysis.com website that keeps track of those, and also eBay auctions, sold ended listings. You can see where that market is going right now. On the census, we have 91 9.8s and 200 of the 9.6. And this storyline would be reprinted in the Silver Surfer Rebirth of Thanos graphic novel, which came out in 1993. The number 9 comic of the year was not historically important at all at the time, but due to the success of the movies, lots of interest now. Guardians of the Galaxy #1 came out. It was surprisingly the very first ongoing series the team had ever had, even though they were created in the 1960s. And looking a little deeper into this book, of course, it's the #1 series. It features the original team, not the characters in the movie. This has a Jim Valentino cover art and story. Print run estimated at 240,000 copies. And on the census, you can see in the last 7 years since the movie came out, the census has really filled up. Almost 1,000 copies graded now. 560 9.6s or higher. Heritage has now even sold 19 copies of this book. In the Overstreet price guide, you can see before the movie hype came, this comic had very little value at all. In fact, it was only a 10-cent book in lowest grades. So since the movie hype started, this book has jumped 30 times in price in lower grades, and even in highest grades has gone up 10 times in price. We have 265 9.8s, 295 9.6s. The number 8 comic of the year, Ghost Rider #1. This was one of the biggest relaunches of the year for sure. Ghost Rider originally having a series back in 1973, but now we get a new Ghost Rider and a new ongoing series. This is the first appearance of Dan Ketch. Print run estimated at 270,000 copies. It's the number 8 book of the year and number 61 overall for the decade. CGC has over 1,300 copies graded with over 800 9.6s or higher. Heritage has only sold 8. Here you can see the direct edition, the newsstand, and even the second printing direct edition has Ghost Rider's face instead of Spider-Man in the bottom corner. In the Overstreet price guide for raw copies, no movement at all in lower grades, but it's been slowly moving up every year in higher grades raw. On the census, there are 365 9.8s. And notice there is a second printing with a lot of copies graded, 80 in total with 16 9.8s. Number 7, this is an interesting one to make the list. Elektra Lives Again. This is actually not in comic book format. This is a graphic novel written by Frank Miller telling the tale of the return of Elektra. It's an oversized hardcover book. Print run estimated at 100,000 copies. Note there is a second printing and later printings done in different dimensions. Because it's oversized, this book cannot be graded by CGC, so you'll see there are no copies graded. And Heritage has sold 8 copies. In the Overstreet price guide, no movement in any grades for the last few years. It's holding steady. It had a hefty original cover price of $24.95, but it has gone up in price a bit. Next on our list, number 6. We're getting into the major superhero books of the year now. Uncanny X-Men Annual, number 14. Lots of interest in this book. Always, it's the cameo first appearance of Gambit. Now, annuals at this time were 64 pages with a hefty cover price of $2. So double the cost, double the pages. This book has a lot of copies printed, 375,000 copies, because Marvel and X-Men, that was pretty well almost their best-selling title at this time period. There are 6 copies of this book graded 9.9 by CGC. This is the number 40 book of the entire decade. Census has really gone crazy for this one. Almost 2,700 copies graded, including over 1,400 9.6s or higher. Heritage has even sold 20 in the last few years. Little movement in lower grades, because again, these are cheaper books, but in high grade, it's been slowly bumping up every year. And this year had its biggest bump ever. There are 6 9.9s and 817 9.8s of this key book. Number 5 of the year is Silver Surfer 44, another classic Thanos cover. And it's the first appearance of the Infinity Gauntlet in this issue. Print run estimated at 156,000 copies. It's number 24 most valuable Marvel book of the entire decade. We're getting into the books here. And again, the census has gone crazy. Over 1,300 copies currently graded, 659.6 or higher. Heritage, however, has only sold 1 copy ever in the last 20 years. Overstreet Price Guide, this book has had huge growth in the last 15 years. It had a really big bump. It wasn't a key at all over a decade ago, and you can see it's really jumped up. However, in lower grades in the last 4 years, it has been stalled, but in high grades, it keeps sneaking up there. On the census, there are 300 9.8s, and there's even an Australian edition printed 4 months later with 1 9.6 on the census. Uncanny X-Men 266. Now we're into books that are now peaking at over $150 in raw near mint minus 9.2 grade. This is a book everyone seems to want. Again, fairly common. Print run 415,000 copies, but it is the first full appearance of Gambit, now a classic cover by Andy Kubert. Ranks 12th most valuable Marvel comic of the decade. Look at the census in the last 6 years. It has gone crazy. Over 14,000 copies graded, including over 7,000 9.6s or higher. Heritage has now sold 223 of this book. This is really showing signs of becoming one of the true classics of the 90s that could truly be a gem in the future. It's got slow but steady growth in lower grades, a big jump in high grades this year after stalling for a few years. And on the census, there are 15 9.9s and almost 3,000 9.8s. There's a Brazilian edition that came out 4 years later with 1 copy graded. Now we're up to the big books. New Mutants, number 87. This has been a key issue book for 30 years, and always interest is high for this book. Why? New Mutants was a fairly big selling title for Marvel at this time. Print run estimated at 330,000 copies. It is the first full appearance of Cable and has the first appearances of Strife, Freedom Force, and the Mutant Liberation Front. Note there's also a second printing gold cover edition, which is scarcer, but also in high demand right now. This is the number 11 most valuable Marvel comic of the 1990s. On the census, we have over 9,000 copies graded, including over 4,400 9.6 or higher. Heritage has sold 130 copies. On the census, this book is quite valuable, but actually it has stalled in Overstreet for the last 4 years in a row in all grades. It's the second printing that's a lot more affordable. It's been sneaking up every year in high grades. Maybe one day it'll possibly catch up due to rarity. On the census, there are 3 9.9s and almost 1,900 9.8s. The second printing also has 560 9.8s. Well, the top 2 are quite interesting because you could say it's the same book. The #2 comic of the year is Spider-Man #1, the most hyped up book of 1990. There were many different variations of this book, but the one that ranks second of the year is the UPC second printing gold edition. It had a very limited print run of less than 10,000 copies, intended for sale only in packages at Walmart. It's believed to be rarer than even the Platinum edition, which is special for retailers. So the limited collector's package included the first 5 issues with the second printing of #1. So this would have come out at least 5 months after the first printing. There are 5 copies graded 9.9, and 1 copy even grades a perfect 10 by CGC. There are 8 versions of this book. Print run estimated at only 8,000 copies. It's the #7 Marvel comic of the 1990s. The census is still pretty small because this is a rare book. 399 copies graded, including 233 9.6 or higher. Heritage has only ever sold 2 copies of this book. So notice it has the UPC barcode. There's a $1.75 cover price. It's gold covered, and it only came in this bag set at Walmart. Looking at the Overstreet price guide, you can see small, steady growth in lower grades, and it's really been moving decently in higher grades, now at $270 raw for a 9.2. On the census, there is the 110, 5 9.9s, and 143 9.8s. Which brings us to the #1 most valuable Marvel comic of 1990. It is the special retailer's Platinum Edition version of Spider-Man #1, limited to a print run of 10,000 copies. None sold to the general public. Only retailers got these. It has no cover price on the cover, green background cover. So it, at first glance, looks like the common versions. This features new McFarlane art and editorial material in place of the ads found in the regular editions. It has a stiffer cover with no price. It is the #4 most valuable Marvel comic of the decade. There are over 1,300 copies graded by CGC, including 402 9.6s. Heritage has sold 55 copies of the rare Platinum edition. Overstreet's had pretty nice growth in the last 8 years. It's doubled even in really low grades. And it's tripled, 2.5 times about in high grades raw, but definitely moving up every year. Lots of demand for this book. One of the rarest Spider-Man comics of the 90s. There are 123 9.8s, 279 9.6s. Now we're going to compare these 10 books on the CGC census to see what trends we notice. By far, the most common book on the list is X-Men 266 with the 14,000 copies graded, followed by New Mutants 87 with 9,000 copies. At the opposite end, we've got the Spider-Man UPC Gold Edition with a very low 399, proving its rarity. And then we also have Guardians of the Galaxy #1 with less than 1,000, and Silver Surfer 34 with less than 1,000. On the high end of the census, the Spider-Man UPC Gold Edition, even though it's the rarest book on the list, is the only one that by amazing luck has a 10.0 graded copy by CGC. You'll see that there are 4 books in the top 10 that actually have 9.9s. And then after that, 9.8s are pretty common for all of them. The one with surprisingly the least amount of copies graded, Silver Surfer 34, has only 91 9.8s. There you go, the biggest Marvel books of 1990. Thanks for watching this video every week. Please subscribe to this channel. We do this continually, new videos every couple of days. Thanks for watching.